do. Welcome. My name is Megan Kirby. I am the Dissemination and Implementation Specialist with Language Dynamics Group. Today is October 7th, 2021, and the topic of this free webinar event today is called Scary Stories, Social Emotional Vocabulary and Story Champs. So on our agenda, here's how I've laid it out for y'all. It is going to be what is social emotional vocabulary? Why should we teach it? Can I measure it? And what available tools or measures are out there to do so. And then I'm going to briefly go over what Story Champs is. This is not intended to be an intro basic level Story Champs. Could be, as many of you have attended trainings, that's like an all day thing sometimes. We do have plenty of videos on our website for you to reference if this is your first introduction to it. Welcome, but I will definitely, get you more information elsewhere. Okay, as far as the slides and the presentation go, I will go ahead and post the recording link to our website buy myself some time, probably about a week or so. And then if you do need a copy for your records of the training slides, I can get you them. There's gonna be a lot of images and photos and not a lot of content. So I do recommend that if you need to keep this, use your certificate of attendance, go ahead and take notes, but also keep your registration form so you have a little bit of information about what this presentation is about. After I go over briefly what Story Champs is, then we'll go over how we use it in terms of teaching social emotional vocabulary. And then again, I will answer and address as many questions as I possibly can. It's only an hour webinar, and I've already taken up too much of our time on this agenda. So I will provide my email at the end. So what is social emotional vocabulary? SEL, or is social emotional learning. It's kind of the big buzzword in a lot of the curricula. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it is a buzzword and it's attracted a lot of attention where people will go to look for resources on social emotional learning and skills curricula, but not very many exist out there that are research-based. So for the purposes of this webinar, I just want to focus on the vocabulary aspects. What is social emotional vocabulary? It refers specifically to words that we use that we, on purpose, we develop them so that we can have the ability to recognize, then label or tact, and then understand the feelings that we experience ourselves, that others experience, and that we know they are experiencing because they display behaviors that we have paired with certain words, right? So basically, in a nutshell, social emotional vocabulary are the words that we use to navigate social contexts and to both give and receive social support in good and bad times, right? So it's not just the bad emotions. To go over this and orient you because the print isn't as pretty as I was thinking it was. So feeling words are considered social emotional vocabulary. And in this area that we are all talking about in terms of oral language, social emotional literacy is its own thing. It's been researched and discussed for decades now. And so Crick and Dodge and Joseph and Strain are going to be the big names in that area. And what they describe feeling words as functioning as are one, words that help us understand our feelings. So many children are either happy or mad or sad, right? They're exposed to these very basic words early in their life. These are when parents or caregivers are asking them why they're crying and labeling at the same time, are you upset? Are you mad? And usually it's in a way that gets a yes or no answer. So children actually may not truly understand that there are subtle gradations of like in between feelings on this continuum. And that's not to say that they don't exist. They just don't have labels and definitions for these emotions yet. So really, we need to teach, sometimes explicitly, other words that can help describe the emotions and the feelings, the physical states of being that facilitate. Then in the orange, it says getting help, right? So if we can use vocabulary words that we learn, so if we can receptively identify them, match, point to, touch, we can't use them yet, then at least we have we're building a repertoire, right, of our vocabulary. And then in the context when the motivation is super powerful, in behavior analysis, we call it a motivating operation. Something sets it up that we are going to recall some of those words. We may not have used them, but in a situation that is so dire in order to get help, we will say that we are angry or that we are disappointed. And I'm thinking of words as a parent that when the motivating operation is there and your child has just taken a Sharpie to your TV screen. So speaking from personal experiences, this is when these things to happen. Yeah, you're going to use some words that convey true feelings beyond mad. And then that also allows us to connect with others. So in order, we can just memorize words, right? But in order to understand them, the words and the way they're taught really are built on a foundation of trust. And we're going to listen to those. We're going to trust people as they're sharing their own feelings. They're labeling their own feelings in front of us. And that's a way that we can expand our own language, right? It helps us connect with other people who may have the same feelings, in addition to the getting the help. So the empathy and some other things that we can teach. When individuals are able to express themselves, it will get them more support. And last but not least, if we are able to, one, understand that there are more words than just the continuum of sad, angry, mad, happy, we have more words, then we can relate those things to different situations. And then we can start to possibly learn to problem solve. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Michelle Garcia Winner's program, Social Thinking, and she has this term, big problem, little problem glitch. And when we have more words to describe our emotions and categorize them, then we're able to effectively take appropriate actions that match the size of the problem that we're encountering or facing, right? So, not endorsing any particular program, but given the audience, I figured that we were all familiar with some of those words. But there are really higher order cognitive skills that are required, executive functioning, that are required a lot more calories, right? And so I would love for children to have a great repertoire of emotional vocabulary so that they're not stumbling over those things when they're really trying to work through a difficult situation or an experience. Really also just on a final note, is that we want children specifically, but even adults, to really engage in discussion about personal experiences. So when we're talking about storytelling, it's a behavior that allows us to share, both convey our understanding to others, like what we know about the world, what we've experienced, share our knowledge or our skills in language complexity and narrative structure, from an academic standpoint. But it's also about giving people, especially those who are marginalized, so children who come from low-income families who lack resources in their communities often, and social supports, children with disabilities or some traumatic backgrounds, they often have limited feeling vocabularies in comparison to their peers because they're not, families are busy. So they're not going to sit down and go through some rich vocabulary instruction in their early years. So that's one. And then two, a lot of it has to do, besides time, with the curricula or the exposure that we get to in our teaching materials and the types of words that we use, the advanced vocabulary. And beyond the advanced vocabulary, like, some really difficult words that are content specific, like social studies or science or math. Beyond the subject area vocabulary, we often omit more difficult and complex emotional social vocabulary, some metacognitive words. And so what that does, unfortunately, is really limit the social emotional vocabulary that the individuals that may need it the most in order to advocate for themselves, in order to seek help. It limits their ability to do so, right? They're restricted. So in general, what we're doing today is adults can increase children's feeling words, just call them feeling words right now, by teaching different ones and teaching the definitions correctly, using incidental instruction, especially in the most effective manner to do so is especially in the context of conversation and play, right? Those two things, those are very natural. And we can set things up and opportunities for students or children to learn that aren't contrived, like labeling photos of people and asking how those people feel based on their looks. So why teach social emotional vocabulary? We've all experienced a pandemic. It's a global, we are sometimes still experiencing this pandemic, and it has restricted and drastically altered our lives, right? A lot of us as adults struggle with how this has affected us. I can't imagine not having words to describe things besides burnt out, besides burnout, really boredom, a great word that I've had to use, frustration, loneliness, annoy. There's just a lot of words that I can use to describe to my partner, to my family about how I'm feeling, and then, either be left alone or get the support that I need, get that extra hug, and extra grace and time and patience. So what we're going to do is by helping children learn these words, we're helping them manage the stress, and at least lessen or reduce some of that and its toxic effects, like it can build up. So we want them to access the care and support from their trusted adults and get it because they're able to convey a feeling to those adults. What we know about in early childhood and social emotional vocabulary, really it's conversations with primary caregivers that teaches children the feeling words that they will need to use. So a study in 2009, Van Bergen and colleagues, they taught parents of preschool students to engage in like emotion rich reminiscing. So talk about an event that's happened in your recent, because they're preschoolers, but recent past, like they went to a carnival or they went to a birthday party and it rained. Right now, we have tons and tons of these examples in terms of canceled plans, like family plans. We didn't go get to see our extended family members over the holidays. The pandemic has provided us with a plethora of examples that we could use about talking about past events and disappointment, right? Anyway, so the intervention was really targeting the parents' ability to use more emotions, and they had to train them because we don't do it. We either protect the children, especially young ones, or we're limiting our words to that mad, sad, angry, happy context. And what they found is that preschoolers actually the ones that talk more about their emotions during conversation with their mothers, they actually demonstrate more advanced knowledge of emotions in general, and it lasts, it carries on. So when they're engaged in story retell in the school setting, when they're writing stories, personal story generation, and it's written, they're including a lot of those emotion feeling words that they actually learned when they were engaged in conversation with their parents, like a couple of years earlier. So there's a lot more research than that, but I thought that one was a super cool study, and had meaningful effects with the mothers. I'm going to show this to you. I am going to go ahead and pause my share just to make sure that when I share this again, you get the audio. There we go. Okay. I want you to watch this. Some of you have seen this before. This is a friend of mine in Canada, and this is her son, and they are going to talk about a current event. If one of you in the chat can let me know that you can hear it and say yes, I will be monitoring just to make sure. Can everybody hear that? Perfect. Okay, thanks. Okay, now you guys can't hear it. So what happened? Let me start over. I'm totally monitoring. I don't have any help. Hold on one second. Let's do this. Let's do this again. Technology is great until it's not. Okay. Thank you all for bearing with me. Luckily, it's only 2 minutes. Okay, let's try this.
Tell me about a time that you felt upset about the virus closing something down. What was closed because of the virus?
The trampoline park.
Oh my god. Oh my gosh, the trampoline park?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so you couldn't go.
Yeah.
What else?
But were you there?
I've been there before. Have you been there before?
Yeah.
Oh, and tell me, what do you think you'll do at the trampoline park when it's open again?
Do the basketball, but the basketball's really hard.
The basketball's really hard. And can I tell you something?
Yeah.
Sometimes there are places that I want to go that are also closed because of the virus. Is that a pain? Oh my goodness. How does that make you feel when all the places are closed?
Mad.
So mad? Where do you feel the madness in your body? Right here?
Yeah.
Like right here?
Yeah.
And right here?
Yeah.
And right here?
Yeah.
And do you feel it here?
No.
Do you feel it here?
No.
Here?
Yeah.
Here? Oh my goodness. And what do you do to make yourself feel happy after?
The virus is over and we can play.
You think about when the virus is over?
Yeah.
And you can play?
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing with me.
Okay, sorry about technical difficulties. It's always something else when you try to program things yourself. So let's get past let's get past that one. Okay. So the whole purpose of that in the video, let me just summarize, is a parent asking their child about a time or disappointed or sad, right? They're going to set up an opportunity for their child to share about a time or an event in which they felt a certain way. Rather than asking explicitly, how did you feel when, and then giving that child the thing to talk about, right? So we want to follow children's lead. And the reason being is that we're focusing on building oral narrative skills. So I want to get the context and the setting and the characters, and I don't want to feed those to children. That yeah, it is supposed to be a purple screen. I'll tell you in a minute. And so I really want to focus and let you know that it's not so much the social emotional vocabulary that we are focusing on. It's the vocabulary in context of the story. Okay. So this is an image that was shot post Hurricane Katrina in America, in the United States rather. And so immediately following the hurricane, there were a group of preschoolers, and some researchers followed these children and asked them to recall information about the event, right? And so a free recall. And so they sampled their language and just had a lot of rich content. And they didn't lead them. They're like, tell me everything you know about Hurricane Katrina. Well, then 6 years later, they followed up with those same children. So now they're 9, 10 years old. All right. At 6 years, right? So the preschool, sorry, at the preschool level, a lot of the children who recalled more information about the hurricane actually showed better psychological outcomes immediately. So they were able to make sense in cohesive, coherent manner, create a story or a narrative about their experience, and that thus impacted their ability to cope in the immediate, right? Has nothing to do with, the long-term effects, right? Your school's gone, your house is gone, your family is split up. All of these other things, not counting for that. But the children that were really higher stress levels, they measured that as well. They provided less information in those free recalls. They used a lot of negative emotion words and cognitive processing, like we decided to move and I'm really sad. And that was about the extent of that sample rate. It was very brief and there wasn't a whole narrative about it. So there were children who had strong narrative skills, and then there were children who didn't, had a lot of rich social emotional vocabulary, we'll say, right? 6 years later, so at ages 9 or 10, the children with the stronger oral narrative skills, not just the emotions, actually included more positive emotions in their samples and had better psychological outcomes than the kids initially who had more negative social emotional words, but had less narrative information in their recall. And so what that goes to show us is that, and this study has been, unfortunately, climate change and everything has just become more common. Some of these storms, and as recent as earlier this year, same researchers did it again, and they're going to follow those young children. But we have a lot of data that go to show it's the narrative skills, not just the vocabulary and isolation, that helps individuals cope with their experiences because they're able to make a cohesive and coherent narrative out of those, and it helps them understand, right? It also, in that sense, helps them access supports and services because they're able to understand their experience. They're a little bit more able to understand what kind of help or support that they need, or sometimes just a hug, right? Okay. So here is basically a tip sheet, and this is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, the National Center for PTSD. This is a handout that's given to families. It was 2018. You can Google this. I'm not going to provide a link. I apologize. But you can Google this document, Parent Tips for Helping Preschool-Age Children After Disasters. If we look at some of the things like the reactions or behaviors that children, exhibit, one of them is not talking. So, being silent or having difficulty saying what's bothering them. So you can't access support if you're quiet. Then you're going to have people guessing what you need, and eventually you'll say yes just to get that adult to be quiet. Or they mention something like McDonald's, and you're going to say yes, even though that wasn't really what you wanted. So some of the responses that we have as adults that we should react to, right, are to put common feelings, give examples of sentences, talk about our own feelings in the same context, just like that parent did in the video previously, who provided her own story, right? She related to that child's feelings and tried to contribute to that narrative by sharing that, there are some times that she's disappointed when things are closed down, right? And then it's not forcing them to talk. It's letting them go and then kind of following where they're going in terms of their story. And then some of the things that this group have suggested, examples of things to do and say. So the behaviors that we should do. It's really providing art play materials to help them express ourselves. So again, like it's allowing them to construct a narrative, telling a brief story about different feelings, constructing a narrative, right? And then also it's relating to the narratives, or if children omit certain feeling words, rather than insert the feeling words, you can talk about some other kids may feel a certain way. So say something like children can really feel sad when their home is damaged. Damage would be an advanced vocabulary word, right? children who are in preschool may not understand damaged, but they'll learn, right? And through this experience, but it's about placing some kind of emotion word in response to the problem. I love story champs. So there's a lot of compelling evidence from 2 decades of research, again, on social emotional learning in school settings, that teaching children the cognitive skills, like problem solving, decision making, perspective taking, teaching children emotional skills like empathy, emotional regulation, and then social skills, cooperation, helping, communication. I would even say empathy there too. Teaching all of these things at school has positive effects on students' attitudes, behaviors, mindsets, performance. All of these things that actually impact their enjoyment at school, 2, connections with others, and 3, their ability to navigate their environment without needing significant adult support. So again, this is really where the social emotional vocabulary comes in, but also the ability to engage in conversations about it, right? So this brings us to, okay, that's great. I get it. I understand basically what social emotional vocabulary is. I can see the importance of it. But how do I authentically measure my own students' or clients' ability to use that language in a natural context, right? So I'm not looking for the Peabody picture vocabulary. Like, I'm not looking for contrived situations and labeling. I'm not talking here about throwing up a picture or photo and asking a child, how do they feel? That usually results in memorization, and it's very difficult to get that to generalize to natural context, right? So I want to get a good idea of where my students or clients are. And how I can do that is by using the cubed. So hopefully all of you, one of you can be like a good helper if you do have the link. So I don't have to monitor the chat. But the cubed narrative language measures, that's a part of the cubed assessment. It is free on our website if you don't already have it. And the cubed, it can be used to sample students' ability to produce narratives that include emotion words, right, or social emotional vocabulary, as well as the metacognitive cognitive processing words. And those are words like decided, considered, thoughtfully, some of these more advanced vocabulary words, in addition to the emotions. So we do have the cubed on the website. You enter your email and you can download it. It's in a big old zip folder. And thank you again, Jordan, so much for that. But I love it. And here's where I would suggest that if this is new to you, this is where you would start. So there's 3 things that come in the cubed. We have the narrative language measures, the listening. We have narrative language measures, reading. And then we also have the dynamic decoding, the DDM measures. So specifically for the purpose of social emotional vocabulary, let's take a look at the NLM listening. So the one on the left, specifically a kindergarten benchmark. And then we'll also take a look at, how do we embed and how can we measure social emotional vocabulary in the NLM reading? We'll look at the reading benchmark for first grade. So this right here is the NLM listening kindergarten benchmark. This is story 1 in the fall. So if you have any questions about how to use that, we have the manual that comes with it. But we have tons of videos on the website. I'm always here to answer any questions you may have individually. But to go over this, I want to point out some things. With the listening, NLM listening, what we do is, as an evaluator or an examiner, I read the story to the child. Key is that they're listening. It's not in front of them. They're not reading it. So I want them to cue in. And in each of the stories, they're leveled in terms of how advanced or complex they are, how long they are based on age. But within each of the stories, all of them, they have emotion words. So what you'll see here is in this story right here. It says, one day Scott was skateboarding in a gigantic park that was near his house. He liked being at the park, but Scott wasn't having fun. He kept tumbling off his skateboard. He was getting hurt. Scott was sad because he wanted to skateboard. So that right there is the feeling is in response to the problem. And that's how we structure our social emotional vocabulary words. How do the characters respond to the problem emotionally? Not just the plan and attempt in terms of a physical action. The plan or attempt is he decided to nicely ask his brother for help. So I can observe that. But how did he feel? He kept falling off his skateboard and getting hurt. So at the kindergarten level, we might say sad, whereas when we get older, it might be frustrated, right? And then we're going to continue to read on, right? And what happens is when we are done reading it to the students, then we say, thanks for listening. Now it's your turn to tell me that same story. And in the retell, do the children actually retell one with all the story grammar parts, which are these icons to help you if this is new to you, but do they include the social emotional vocabulary, or is that something that they are leaving out? And there's a wide range of student abilities to what they cue into and what they don't. They may have all the parts except for an emotional reaction, to the problem, and then after the problem is resolved. And we might want to consider why. These are very basic emotion words in this kindergarten level. It's sad and happy. But I would like to say, as we're going, if they're still not including that, it might be worth investigating, are they fluent in that? Do they use these words in their own personal generation? Are we exposing them enough to how characters have different emotions? We don't want to always assume that families are going to do that on their own, right? Okay. So that's the kindergarten listening, the benchmark. And then this is the NLM reading, and it starts at first grade. And so what we do here with this measure, we put the story in front of the child. There are no pictures in the reading one. And so we have a separate piece of paper that we provide for y'all. And you put it in front of the student. It's not color coded, black and white. And then we are going to give the instructions of please read this aloud. Do your very best reading. I'll help you if you need it. When you're done, I may ask you to tell me the story. You can go into decoding fluency. There's all these things. This is such a cool measure. It's only one page too. But I want you to look at and orient you to the actual story that the children are reading. So when they're done with this and they get through it and, they can do the retell part, you flip the story over, you take the piece of paper away, and because we don't want it in front of them. And I want them to be able to retell that same story. And again, just like with the kindergarten, I want to see if they're going to be able to retell the story with all the key story grammar parts, including the emotions, including the reaction to the problem, and then what the reaction is after the problem is solved. So what you'll see here is that we are including multiple feeling words. So Brianna was angry and she was mad. So we're doing is teaching that angry and mad can be synonyms, right? And then also when the problem is resolved in the story, after Brianna sat back down, she was happy because they had collaborated. I love it. I met with some SLPs today in Michigan, and they had this great point that, sometimes when you look for or you hear some of these emotion words, they're usually followed by or connected with some of these conjunctions, right? So if you're looking at complex language and wanting to build that, or does my student or client include complex language? Sometimes it's easy to listen for the emotion words and see if they're making a connection between, the different parts of a story or the actions or episodes and the responses that characters have. So yes, enjoy. All right. How about this? There is definitely a webinar. I'll get you the this is not enough time for me to explain this to you. And I will definitely I'll see if I can remember. If you're on Instagram and you follow us, it's in the pin. It's at Language Dynamics Group. And then our website, we have a pin to all the recorded webinars. We also have videos of administration of these things, just FYI. But for the sake of time, that's a whole nother training. And I'll do another one soon. So what is Story Champs? So that's the assessment measure. So I'm going to come out of this assessment and with a measure actually of, let's say my students are not using feeling words at all, right? They just keep omitting it. Well, in that light, I want to be able to target it, right? And I want to know that the curriculum that I'm going to use and the intervention that I'm going to use is going to do that for me. I don't want to have to go back and program and include all of these words. And how do I pick the right level words? We do level our language. All of the stories at certain level, like level A, all have the same about 150 words, right? So this is empirically supported. I'm a researcher. The developers, Trina and Doug, are researchers in addition to practitioners. And so it's all very purposeful. And we did a great job of picking out language and words that children, it's at their zone of proximal development, but the emotions they should be familiar with. So it's not too advanced. We're not going to create weird kids like robots who are using words that their peers aren't going to understand. We don't want children to only talk to adults, right? We want them to get along with kids their own same age that will be their coworkers one day. So here's an example. Actually, hold on one second. Go back. We've got a storybook in the kit. And then we've got champs checks. They look like little bingo cards, but they're not. That's for kids to check each other's retells and generation. Story starter cards, all these icons. The pictures come with the kit. Then we've got story games. The story sticks, they're little popsicle sticks. They may or may not look like this. Depends on our production team. I like the colored popsicle sticks. Then we have the bingo cards, and then we have the die. And so just like a brief snippet of like what the kit comes with, that also comes with a flash drive with the digital presentation link. So I want to look at that right now, so that you can get a good idea. If you were presenting this digitally, like the pictures would come up and you would be able to drag and drop the icons. Super cool. If you own a kit and you cannot find that, let me know. Alex, I'm with you. Yeah, I get it. It's about as good as we get right now. So the content specific and content generic visual supports, what that means, we're going to leave it open to decide some of the words and the reactions the characters might need to have. So yes, we have stories, but in a retell, it's also very important if the kids swap out or switch out some of the feeling words with their own, or replace them with a feeling that they think is more appropriate, we go with it. We're not going to correct them. This is not the hill I want to plant my flag on and die. You gotta let them share their experiences, and their background's going to influence how they retell the story in terms of emotion. So you can see that the girl is angry, but she also might be frustrated, right? So that there's ways that we advance the level of the stories, but the pictures stay the same. Based on the level you are, you might have different emotion words. Also extremely important for us to have multiple exemplar training. And what that means is that the higher construct, like story structure, is taught only because we expose children to different stories with the same structure. So we never, ever, ever want to repeat use of the same story and get the children to master it or memorize it. Okay. So when I say that is some individuals look at, okay, they can retell a story with 80% accuracy. I actually don't want to do that when I'm doing story champs, because I want it to be errorless learning. I want there to be a flow and not a stop and start. I'm not looking at it as discrete trial instruction. How I will measure my effectiveness as an interventionist or as a teacher is that their scores on the NLM and that cubed assessment will go up. So let me teach, let me do story champs, and let me do my thing and be a great effective teacher, mix and vary, two-step prompting and correction procedures, errorless learning, having the games, and not be tied down to the data sheet, because that's not the time to take the data. We want to, if this is effective, which it is, you will see gains on the NLM, listening and reading, depending on which one you use. So the goal generally is to teach storytelling and the language we use to tell stories, but not actually specifically retell or memorize a specific story. And when that happens, that's again why we have difficulty generalizing emotions from those picture cards to real life, or to labeling other people's emotions, because they never quite match, right? All right. So there are two types of stories that we have that are designed for different purposes. This is just really briefly. Classic stories teach, and their focus and their purpose is to teach some, like the simple stories in the story grammar. They use high frequency vocabulary words. Okay. And then we have blitz, which are all down here. And those are more complex stories and they have lower frequency words. So the advanced vocabulary, they're all embedded. And so I just want you to look like there's different levels and they have different targets. It's all in the table of contents when you open up our storybook. But see, like level A, vocabulary words, learning vocabulary words from context. And that's in Blitz versus classic stories is, hey, on my NLM, the student did not have all 5 story grammar parts. And if you don't, you're not going to tell a cohesive, coherent story to then allow me to work on your vocabulary or your complex language, right? So that's how we level them. Whole nother, it's all in the manual, but also trainings. If you're using Story Champs and you need refresher trainings, we do those. So let's look at, this is just level A classic. This was like the basic of the basic. This is the story, okay? And we include in the table at the bottom some of the targets, like the story grammar parts, and that includes the feeling, the feeling in response to the problem, okay? We're not doing an end feeling. And so when we look at this right here, Hannah was walking down to the basement to play with her new doll. When she came down the stairs, she saw her sister playing with her doll. Hannah was mad because she wanted to play with it. Okay, so that right there is the response to Hannah's emotional response to the problem. Then we also have a physical plan or attempt, a response, right? Hannah asked her sister to let her play. So that's her actually physical, observable, measurable behavior in response to the problem. We also include words like cheerfully said, that kind of, they're advanced vocabulary. Kids are not going to use these words. We're exposed to them mostly when we read or in writing. But we do want to expose them to it. So it's not super important that in the retell, the children say, then her sister cheerfully said, no, it's more about fluency and like being exposed to this advanced vocabulary that's associated with social emotional language. So let's say I was, this is how our digital presentation link looks. And so if I was doing level A story 4, this is that siblings one that with Hannah, that was just on the story was on the previous slide. And she's coming down the stairs and she saw her sister playing with the doll and she was mad. So you can see how we're teaching the story grammar parts. And so really it's the Story Champs stories that provide the context as well as like multiple opportunities for exposure to these words across stories, in different stories, some synonyms. So it's the social emotional vocabulary and the metacognitive terms. By exposing them to them and embedding them in the stories, we did that for you. What we're doing is also teaching problem solving, right? So we're giving kids a background or repertoire of potential solutions to problems that they may experience that may not be quite the same, but they might be similar. So what are problems that are faced by the characters? Every story has a problem faced by a character. What are the initial emotional responses to those problems? You know, every story has that. So a character experiences an emotional response. And this one looks very visceral in response to the problem, right? And then also, what's our metacognitive vocabulary? Like decided, considered. So our thought words, right? And then we always have a resolution. And then we get, as the children master the 5 story grammar components, not master the story, they master retelling all stories. And they always include those 5 story grammar components. Then we add on things like the setting, as well as an emotion or emotional response to the resolution. So I would like to see it like at the end where the ending is basically she plays with her sister. I would like to see some other statement as the children advance in their narrative skills to say, and they both were happy and they played together again, right? So there's always a second emotion word or feeling word. So the story grammar markers that we have, like this, these are the solutions to our problems, right? So we play games called story gestures and we pair these things where they can actually be used as nonverbal cues. Like, we all good? Everything resolved? And so I have seen some teachers use those as indicators from Story Champs, so indicators quietly that everything's good and they don't need to come over and help out with a group project. We also do, there's another one for the feeling words. This is like the emotion, not poking your eyes, but kids do crazy things, right? So, but the emotion indicator or story gesture is going to be like the finger, like a tear, right? And so we play these games, and it could be a cue, and we're fading out our verbal cues and prompts, our vocal prompts. I might just try to get students to remember like what their response was, the character's response was to the initial problem. I might just do this and not stop and say, well, how did they feel? Right. So we want to keep a flow going. So we also want to remember that children need to learn vocabulary and context. I'm sure we all know this. Like the context piece is super important. We need to be talking about events as they are occurring. Research has shown, Hendrick and colleagues in 2009 showed that if we have an ongoing event that we can tell a story about later, if we can talk about it in the moment using that advanced vocabulary, including social emotional words, they are more likely to remember those new terms and use them later on in their recalls. Okay. And that goes back to that whole research with the hurricanes and these students. Students who understood the events tend to have more complex language in them later on in their recalls, cope better, psychological effects were lessened. The ones that provided richer, detailed narratives had greater resiliency. And that's really like their parents spoke to them about the meaning, like the events, right? So as things are occurring and their parents are narrating, even though they themselves are also trying to make sense of the events, their narration is helping that child also create a story in which the two of them can jointly reminisce and process it together, right? So that's that social like group support level that makes us attached and human, right? With each other. Okay, so let's see. What we want to do, so in summary, create a word conscious environment. We do those in our classrooms. We have vocabulary words on these Sparkle word posters, systematic focused vocabulary instruction embedded in context, right? So not teaching emotional words out of context. We're just going to get rote memorization and robots. And then we want to strategically build meta-linguistic awareness. And so going back to some of those cognitive words, making sure that we are exposing children to those words in general by using stories that already have them purposely embedded. These are the ways in which Story Champs embeds this vocabulary. What we do is we expose children to lots of different social emotional vocabulary terms, right? We embed those in the stories, whether they're going to be at the level where they're fluently using those words in the retells or in a generation, at least they're demonstrating understanding in the listening comprehension. So do they receptively understand what that feeling is in response to the problem? And you can do point to, touch, show me in those sense when we have some individuals who can't vocalize some of those feelings. In the recall aspect, that's where I would love for us to not just wait for kids to make mistakes and omit the feeling. I know if my students, particular students, aren't including the social emotional vocab in their retells because of the NLM. So I'm not going to wait for them to fail when I'm doing Story Champs. I want a flow. We want storytelling to be fun and not, I don't want my students to experience failure and then have to go back and correct them and be like, no, say this. He was sad because I'm going to give them the answer and I'm going to have them repeat it back, right? It's more opportunities for responding, frequent responding by students, and also contact with success. It's going to make them more likely to actually learn, and we can advance a lot faster than teaching through consequences after they get it wrong. And then third, once my students can demonstrate, the understanding receptively, then expressively in their retell, then are they using it in writing samples? Are they using it in personal story generation? I give them a prompt, tell me about a time that you felt mad. Are they including all of the story grammar components based on that prompt, right? Or tell me about a time that your plans were canceled, right? And then that omits the actual feeling, and I can find out if they're able to articulate a feeling in response to something similar that happened to them. So these right here are some of the lesson plans that we would focus on. Classic vocabulary words, blitz vocabulary words, how to learn vocab from context, and how to play the Spot the Sparkle game. All of these things we go more into depth later on. We also include information sparkle. I just want to make sure that you all are aware. We do informational passages as well, and give some materials on our flash drive that comes with the kit. But this is an example of the enhanced story structure. This is the add-on, right? So I'm going to try to teach children more advanced vocabulary from using words from context, okay? And I add this to this other lesson plan. It looks a lot simpler when I'm not going this fast. But here are the sparkle words. This tells you what to do. We can have a word journal. Here's all the lesson plans I would use. So we give you the how-to. It's basically a task analysis, right? Like, it tells me what to do. Say, this story has a couple of big words in it that you might not understand. And so some of the blitz words that we do include are going to be some difficult or more advanced vocabulary. And so I do want to point that out. You can also make up your own, right? You can look at some of these stories and pick out some of those words if social emotional words are what your targets are. And then also we have an infographic on the website, just a little plug. That, oh, excuse me. So this is not published yet. It will be. But narrative intervention improves inferential word learning. And so can individuals make inferences, right? Given story champs alone. So if I give you a new passage, can you make an inference about what words mean? I want to point out these are some of this is a level B blitz. Things that we go over are words like disappointed, thrilled. So these are our feeling words, right? Then we do have some take-home activities for families. We have take-home activities for families, right? And they go based on the level that the children are at. So here's an example. If you were working on story 5, level A, this is available for you. It's on the flash drive. And so you can send these home with the family. Because you read that story today, you're not going to read it again because we don't repeat stories. But you're gonna get a new story tomorrow or the next session, but at least the children can extend the learning opportunity to home. And parents, I think by default, myself included, become better storytellers when we learn story grammar. I would love a research study for new SLPs and behaviorists and techs and aides who are not exposed to story champs. And then when they are, like a pre-post, like how good were their stories before story champs and how much better are they now that they're providing instruction in story champs. I wish I had the data on myself. But I'm going to go ahead and let you know, these are there, and they also target the feeling words, right? So we're going to get families in the habit of knowing that their children are being taught these words, and then reinforcing those words when they are used with the family, and maybe being conscious about the words that they're using in their emotion words when they're with their child as well. Okay. So it's about extensions. It's not just about the limited time that we have when we're teaching children. And then this is just like the more advanced, the level B. This is what that looks like. And then our final activity right here, this is not a story in Story Champs. So this is something new. That's I love. But I'm curious, what words would you use? Because you don't know the narrative, but based on the images, what words do you think that you would use if you were the character, and how would you respond in response to the problem that I will not articulate? So in the chat, what words would you see? Got grumpy, bummed. Oh, I love that. Grumpy, bummed, frustrated, annoyed, upset, disappointed. These great words. Used. Perfect. Lonely. Yeah, so in this case, we don't really know. There's the lights on and the child's playing on a tablet, right? And then we don't really know what happened. Lights went out. This is where we are very vague on purpose and story champs. Maybe they didn't pay the bills. Maybe there was a storm and the power went out. Maybe that someone ran into the generator with their car. It's not our place to then determine and set out such a specific context that children aren't able to identify with them, right? So we want it to be a universal problem. I would say that tablets running out of batteries and not being charged is pretty universal lately. But maybe it's just the power. Maybe children don't have their own devices. I know plenty that don't. And so they can identify at least with, oh, the power went out. So this would be an extension of like, how did you feel when power went out in your house? It could be scared. So this is the stuff that we want to make sure that we are generalizing. When I say like, we don't want to memorize a story. It's we want to be able to learn and master the 5 story grammar components, right? And yes, Leslie, Wi-Fi is a huge deal. So I think that that's kind of where, as long as you understand that it is super important, not just to get the narrative, but the emotion piece is a huge part of why storytelling is so important. It's ubiquitous. It extends our like across our lifespan, right? It's how we convey information to others. It's how we entertain others. The ones that have the most friends at the bar are the best storytellers, or in my case, large family funerals. It's just, it's important. And I think what we sometimes omit or forget when we're advocating for narrative language instruction or narrative intervention is that social emotional piece and how individuals can advocate for their needs and wants and be able to connect with others based on those feelings. So without further ado, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I have a couple minutes. I will be posting right now. Don't log off yet. I'm going to go ahead and post a certificate form. And then that way, if you need a certificate of attendance, you can go ahead and get that and I'll get that out to you right away. So here we are. There is your certificate form. Okay. And there is my email at the bottom. It's megan.kirby@languagedynamicsgroup.com. And with that, I will stay on for a little bit more and answer any questions you may have. And if not, I hope you all have a great weekend.